Hey guys, how are you? This video is going to be based on a country music class that I taught a couple of years ago, country music history. So we're going to look at some important moments from the history of country music, and hopefully you'll learn a little bit. I bet a lot of these things you already know, because you guys are very knowledgeable about music and all things that pertain to music, whether it's rock and roll or country. Just a second. Okay. So, this is going to be roughly a recap of the last 100 years. Country music, as we know it today, was first recorded in the 1920s, and here we are now in the 2020s, so 100 years later. All right. So let's start with the 1920s. The first commercial recordings of what was considered country music were Arkansas Traveler and Turkey in the Straw by fiddlers Henry Gilliland and A.C. Eck Robertson on June 30th, 1922 for Victor Records, and released in April 1923. So Arkansas Traveler and Turkey in the Straw were considered the first two commercial recordings of what is known as country music. Another big moment in country music in the 1920s was the Grand Ole Opry. The Grand Ole Opry is a weekly country music stage concert in Nashville, Tennessee. It was founded on November 28, 1925 by George D. Hay as a one-hour radio barn dance on WSM. Currently owned and operated by Opry Entertainment, a division of Ryman Hospitality Properties Incorporated, it is the longest-running radio broadcast in U.S. history. It's been on the air continuously for the last 95 years. It's a long time. So those are two of the biggest events in 1920s country music. The first recordings, Arkansas Traveler and Turkey in the Straw, and the founding of the Grand Ole Opry. Moving into the 1930s, this is a real brief overview, so we're not going to spend too much time on any one decade. In the 1930s, the recording career of Jimmie Rodgers, the father of country music, lasted from 1927 to 1933. Rodgers, who grew up in Meridian, Mississippi, died of tuberculosis at age 35 in 1933. His best-known song, Blue Yodel No. 1, T is for Texas, was released in 1927. A few years ago, we went and toured the Jimmie Rodgers Museum there in Meridian and learned a lot about his music. If you ever seen the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, there's a song in the movie called He's in the Jailhouse Now. That was another Jimmie Rodgers song. Jimmie Rodgers is not that well known today, but in the 1930s he was considered kind of the king of country music. That's why his nickname is the father of country music. All right, we're moving into the 1940s now. Roy Acuff, the original king of country music before the title was bestowed on George Strait, released his classic single Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain in 1947. The song was later covered in 1975 by Willie Nelson and helped catapult him to international stardom. Elvis Presley recorded the song while accompanying himself on piano in the Jungle Room at Graceland on February 7th, 1976. And this was the last song he ever recorded on his home piano. I have a picture here, I believe, of Willie Nelson. Give me just a second, guys. Well, actually, I don't. Never mind. That's okay. All right, still in the 1940s, Gene Autry's recording of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer hit number 1 in the U.S. charts during Christmas 1949. Autry's recording sold 1.75 million copies its first Christmas season, eventually selling a total of 12.5 million. It remains the best-selling single of all time by a country artist. And here's a picture of Gene Autry. Right there on the left, he was a very popular singer from this era. I'll be done in a minute, okay? What's up, buddy?
We need you to dump it out.
Okay, I'll be there in a few minutes, okay? Let me finish my video. You guys, please give me some room, okay? You guys, please.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, guys. I'll be there in a minute, okay?
Bye.
Um, another popular artist from the 1940s that was very popular same time as Gene Autry was Roy Rogers. And let's see, there's Roy Rogers. Gene Autry and Roy Rogers are often associated together because they were popular in the 1940s, so there's the two of them together. In the 1993 song Should Have Been a Cowboy, Toby Keith mentions Gene and Roy, and he's talking about Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. All right, moving to the 1950s, the recording career of Hank Williams lasted from 1947 to 1952. Williams signed with MGM Records in 1947 and released Move It On Over, which became a massive country hit. Move It On Over was originally, some people regard it as the original first rock and roll song, because the melody of Move It On Over is very similar to the melody for Rock Around the Clock. Bill Haley and the Comets released that in the 50s, so some say that Bill Haley was inspired by Hank Williams' song. In 1949, Hank Williams released the song Lovesick Blues. I have a picture of Hank Williams I'll show you guys. Let's see, here's Hank Williams. Williams' version of Lovesick Blues became a huge country hit. The song stayed at #1 on the Billboard charts over 4 consecutive months, crossing over to mainstream audiences and gaining Williams a place in the Grand Ole Opry. Lovesick Blues was originally a 1920s song, but Hank Williams covered it and kind of made it his own signature song. He was nicknamed the Lovesick Blues Boy. Williams had 11 #1 country hits in his career, and those would include Lovesick Blues, Long Gone, Lonesome Blues, Why Don't You Love Me, Moanin' the Blues, Cold Cold Heart, Hey Good Lookin', Jambalaya, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive, Kalijah, Your Cheatin' Heart, and Take These Chains From My Heart. He died on January 1st, 1953. All right, moving into the 1960s now. In April of 1962, Ray Charles released his classic album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music, introducing numerous country hits to a new audience, largely unfamiliar with the genre. So Ray Charles was a big fan of country music, and so he took popular country songs at the time and he rearranged them. He put an orchestra behind them. He gave himself a choir of backup singers, and the songs sound very different from their original country versions. Two of Charles's biggest hits, I Can't Stop Loving You and You Don't Know Me, are from this album. Here's a picture of Ray Charles. Regarded by many critics as Charles' best studio album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music has been considered by several music writers to be a landmark album in American music. The album's integration of soul and country music bent racial barriers in popular music amid the height of the Civil Rights Movement. In the process of recording the album, Charles became one of the first African-American musicians to exercise complete artistic control over his own recording career. Highly recommend that album. If you've never heard it, highly recommend it. It's a great album. Ray Charles' best album, I think, by far. Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. All right, moving along in the 1960s. That was 1962. 1963 now. Buck Owens had a #1 hit with the song Act Naturally. Now that may be a song you've heard before by Buck Owens. It may be a song you've heard by the Beatles. Because in 1965, at the height of Beatlemania, the Beatles paid Owens a tremendous compliment, covering the song with drummer Ringo Starr doing lead vocals. Today, Starr continues to sing the song during his solo concerts. So that just shows that the Beatles, although they're of course, rock and roll musicians, they appreciated country music, American country music. And to my knowledge, it's the only example of a country song that they covered and made part of their own catalog of music. But it shows that they appreciated country music. All right, in 1967, Charley Pride became the first black performer to appear at the Grand Ole Opry in more than 25 years. Pride's last appearance at the Opry was in 1974. Pride today is best remembered for his 1971 hit, Kiss an Angel Good Morning. Pride was named the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year that year. Charley Pride is a Mississippi native. He's from a place in Mississippi called Sledge, and so it's kind of cool that Mississippi can claim him. He's one of the most well-known country music artists of the 1960s and 70s. All right, moving along in the 1960s, Tammy Wynette's hit "Stand By Your Man" was released as a single in September 1968. It proved to be the most successful record of Wynette's career and is one of the most recorded songs in the history of country music. The song reached #1 on the U.S. country charts in late 1968 for 3 weeks. "Stand By Your Man" also crossed over to the U.S. pop charts, peaking at number 19. It elevated Wynette to superstar status. It reached #1 in the UK singles chart when the record was finally released in Britain in 1975, subsequently also reaching #1 in the Netherlands. So it wasn't just a hit in America, it was a hit all over the world. And it became Tammy Wynette's best-known song. All right, moving along in the 1960s, Johnny Cash, after a decade full of ups and downs in the 1960s, including drug addiction and 7 misdemeanor arrests, in 1968 reclaimed the Christian faith he'd been raised in. Though over the next 25 years he continued to need rehabilitation off and on for substance abuse, his priorities were permanently changed. His friendship with Billy Graham led to the production of a film about the life of Jesus, The Gospel Road, which Cash co-wrote and narrated. Cash and his wife June Carter Cash appeared several times in the Billy Graham Crusade TV specials, and Cash continued to include gospel and religious songs on many of his albums. Cash released his gospel album, A Believer Sings the Truth, in 1979. Cash is credited with converting actor and singer John Schneider, Bo Duke of the Dukes of Hazzard, to Christianity. So that was a big moment in country music, and certainly a big moment for Johnny Cash in his personal life. All right, that same year, 1968, the Byrds released their 6th album, Sweetheart of the Rodeo, on August 30th, 1968, on Columbia Records. The Byrds had occasionally experimented with country music on their 4 previous albums. This album represented their fullest immersion into the genre thus far. Here's a picture of the Byrds. Let's see here. There we go, they're the Byrds. The recording of the album was divided between sessions in Nashville and Los Angeles. Upon its release, the album reached number 77 on the Billboard Top LPs chart. The album received mostly positive reviews in the music press, but the band's shift away from psychedelic music alienated much of its pop audience. Despite being the most commercially unsuccessful Byrds album to date upon its initial release, Sweetheart of the Rodeo is today considered to be a seminal and highly influential country rock album. In 2003, the album was ranked number 117 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. All right, moving now to 1969. Hee Haw debuted in the summer of 1969. Just like the Bryan Adams song says, summer of 69. All right, it was canceled in 1971 as part of CBS's Rural Purge, getting rid of country-themed shows such as Mayberry RFD, Green Acres, and the Beverly Hillbillies. Hee Haw, which was hosted by Roy Clark and Buck Owens and featured some of the most popular country artists of the era, continued on the air in syndication until 1992. And then the last thing of the 1960s we're going to look at was Loretta Lynn's hit, Coal Miner's Daughter. This song was recorded in 1969. It was released in 1970. It's an autobiographical song written by Lynn. It went to number 1 on the charts, became her signature song, became one of country music's most widely known songs, and provided the basis for both her autobiography and a movie of her life. So that's a look at the 1960s and 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. So for basically the first 50 years of country music. The next video that I'm going to do will cover the next 50 years in country music, which will cover from the 1970s up until the current years. So that's a look at country music history. This sheet that I'm using, I have a copy of this, so if anybody wants a copy of it, feel free to ask me, and I'll be happy to get you one. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good day.